They called it the most beautiful prison in the world. A palace within a palace, a maze of marble corridors and whispering gardens where dreams were gilded in gold and guarded by silence. The Ottoman imperial harem, hidden deep within the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, was more than a sanctuary of women. It was a machine of empire, a hidden engine of politics, and the stage for some of the most delicate and dangerous games of seduction in human history. Welcome to Harem Secrets, where we explore the forbidden sexual politics of the Ottoman Empire, a world of beauty, jealousy, and unimaginable power. To understand the Ottoman harem, you must first forget the fantasies painted by Western travelers. The lush odalisks reclining on silk cushions, the fountains murmuring beneath stained glass domes. Those were fragments of truth wrapped in imagination. The real harem was something far more complex. It was a political institution, a place where alliances were forged through intimacy, where women wielded influence in whispers rather than decrees, and where a single glance from the Sultan could change the fate of empires. At the height of Ottoman power in the 16th century, the Topkapi Palace was home to nearly 1,000 women, concubines, attendants, tutors, and eunuchs. Most were enslaved, taken from the vast territories of the empire. Circassians from the Caucasus, Greeks from the islands, Slavs from the Balkans. Some were captured in wars, others sold by families in desperate times, believing the Sultan's harem was a destiny of fortune. For a few, it truly was. For others, it was a gilded cage from which they would never escape. The women of the harem lived by strict rules. Every gesture, every word, every glance toward the Sultan was governed by protocol. Yet within these boundaries, power games unfolded as intricate as any played in the imperial council. The women were trained, not only in dance, poetry, and music, but in the art of conversation, of persuasion, of presence. It was said that a skilled concubine could capture a man's mind before she ever touched his hand. The Sultan's choice of companions was not mere pleasure. It was politics. Every favored woman became a potential mother of a prince, and every prince a possible heir. But not all who entered the harem sought the Sultan's bed. Some sought knowledge, some survival, and some revenge. The corridors of the harem were lined with secrets, alliances between women who shared the same enemy, or whispered rumors designed to destroy a rival's favor. The air itself carried intrigue. Eunuchs, those mysterious guardians of the harem, enforced order and carried messages between the inner chambers and the world beyond. The black eunuchs, brought from Africa and loyal only to the Sultan, were said to be both protectors and spies, eyes that saw everything, ears that missed nothing. Legends whispered of hidden tunnels beneath Topkapi Palace, passageways where the Sultan could visit his favorites unseen. Some said that within the deepest rooms of the harem, there were chambers lined with mirrors so he could watch his lovers from every angle, though no historian has ever found them. The rumor persisted, perhaps because it reflected a deeper truth: the Sultan's desire to see all, to know all, to control the world within his palace walls as tightly as the empire beyond them. And yet, for all its sensuality, the harem was ruled not by passion but by hierarchy. At its head stood the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother. Her power was absolute within the harem, her word law. Beneath her were the concubines, the favorites, and the attendants, each ranked according to their status and relationship to the Sultan. The Valide Sultan could raise a woman to prominence or cast her into obscurity with a single command. In many ways, she was the true queen of the Ottoman Empire, even if no crown ever touched her head. Among the stories that echo through the centuries is that of Hürrem Sultan, known in the West as Roxolana, the slave girl who rose to become the legal wife of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. Her ascent from concubine to queen changed everything. Before Hürrem, no slave woman had ever been permitted to marry the Sultan, but her beauty, wit, and political cunning reshaped the very institution of the harem. It was said she cast spells, used perfumes laced with rare aphrodisiacs, and whispered in Suleiman's ear as he planned wars and executions. Whether through love or manipulation, Hürrem broke centuries of custom and began a new era known as the Sultanate of Women. From that point on, The harem was no longer a passive ornament of empire. It became a shadow court, a place where women influenced policy through their sons and lovers. It was said that decisions about wars, appointments, and executions could be traced back to a conversation held in the Sultan's private chambers. European ambassadors feared it, foreign travelers fantasized about it, and the people of Istanbul whispered stories of its power in the coffee houses along the Bosphorus. But with power came paranoia. The harem was as dangerous as it was beautiful. Women disappeared, sometimes sent to distant palaces, sometimes to their deaths. The eunuchs controlled the movements of every inhabitant, yet they too were pawns in the endless game of influence. Poison was a common tool, hidden in sweet sherbets or soaked into silk handkerchiefs. Even the Sultan's bathwater, some said, was tested for toxins before he entered it. And beyond the gilded walls, the empire watched in awe and fear. The people could only imagine what happened within those forbidden chambers. They painted the harem as a place of endless pleasure, a paradise of beauty and indulgence, because the truth was unknowable. The secrecy itself became part of its allure. To this day, the word harem conjures both fascination and mystery, a symbol of ultimate desire and hidden power. As the story unfolds, we'll step deeper into this world, past the marble gates, through the guarded corridors, into the lives of the women who shaped an empire from behind veils of silk. We'll uncover the power struggles, the forbidden romances, and the myths that still haunt history. Because within the walls of the Ottoman harem, desire and ambition were never far apart, and every secret came with a price. They said that inside the Topkapi Palace, time itself moved differently. Days blurred into nights and seasons passed without notice. For the women of the harem, the outside world was a memory they could never touch again. Beyond the walls, the empire stretched from Hungary to Arabia, vast, sunlit, and alive. But within, their world was measured in whispers, glances, and the slow rhythm of waiting. Waiting for favor, waiting for news, waiting to be chosen. The Sultan's choices were both intimate and political. He did not wander the harem like a lover in a tale. Rather, the women were presented to him by the chief black eunuch, the Kızlar Asa, who held one of the most powerful positions in the entire empire. His duty was not only to guard the women but to control access, to decide whose name would be placed before the Sultan and whose would vanish into silence. The eunuch's loyalty was absolute. Yet the rumors said that many were skilled manipulators, using subtle alliances with the Valide Sultan or with influential favorites to shape the course of imperial desire. Behind this web of influence stood the Valide Sultan herself, often unseen but always felt. Her apartments occupied the highest place in the harem, overlooking the courtyards and corridors like a queen surveying her realm. The power of a sultan's mother was legendary. She could determine which concubine might rise to become the next favorite, which prince would be favored as heir, and which minister would fall from grace. Some chroniclers wrote that the Valide Sultan received foreign ambassadors in secret, conducting diplomacy through veiled conversation and gifts of perfumed silk. In the reign of Suleiman, Hürrem Sultan's story became the blueprint for every ambitious woman who followed. Her rise changed the expectations of what a concubine could become. But not all who aspired to her fate met it kindly. In the reigns that followed, countless women learned that ambition could be fatal. In the cold waters of the Bosphorus, stories tell of silk sacks, cafes torbalara, lowered quietly into the waves, carrying the bodies of those who had displeased the throne. The truth of these drownings remains uncertain, but their legend endured, whispered by servants and slaves who claimed to have seen pale shapes drifting beneath the moonlight. Yet the harem was not merely a stage for power. It was also a world of culture, art, and refinement. Inside those chambers, women learned languages, poetry, calligraphy, and music. Some of the empire's most skilled musicians and poets were born from the harem's ranks. A few even corresponded with scholars and philosophers in secret, hiding their intellect behind anonymous verses that circulated in Istanbul's coffee houses. There was, too, a spiritual side to this closed world. Many women found solace in religion, forming small prayer circles and studying the Quran under learned tutors. Others turned to superstition, charms against jealousy, talismans for favor, and love potions made of rare herbs. One tale tells of a concubine who burned jasmine oil mixed with ground pearls, believing its scent would make the sultan dream of her. Another spoke of mirrors inlaid with silver that were said to reflect not one's face, but one's destiny, a superstition that terrified as much as it intrigued. Some Western travelers who managed to glimpse the outer courts of the harem returned to Europe with stories so fantastical that they blurred the line between truth and fantasy. They wrote of pools filled with rosewater where women bathed by moonlight, of perfumed fountains that ran with sherbet, of hidden gardens where nightingales sang while the sultan's favorites performed secret dances for him. While many of these tales were inventions, they revealed how deeply the harem fascinated outsiders, a symbol of both exotic allure and forbidden knowledge. The real intrigue, however, lay not in pleasure, but in lineage. The harem's primary purpose was to produce heirs, sons who could continue the Ottoman dynasty. But succession in the empire was fraught with danger. Each prince was a potential rival, and only one could inherit the throne. When a sultan died, his sons often found themselves in deadly competition, each supported by different factions within the harem. The mother of a reigning sultan became the most powerful woman in the empire, but the mothers of defeated princes faced exile, or worse. This brutal reality gave rise to one of the harem's darkest customs, the cafes, or cage. It was a secluded section of the palace where royal princes were confined for years, sometimes decades, forbidden from seeing the outside world. Their mothers, too, were often isolated, living out their days in melancholy waiting. The harem, for all its beauty, was a place of captivity at every level, for slaves, concubines, and even royal blood. Yet, within this confinement, imagination flourished. Some women commissioned secret portraits, disguised as miniatures or patterns in tiles. Others wrote diaries in coded language, hiding their words inside embroidered cushions or beneath floorboards. Modern historians have discovered fragments of these writings, letters full of longing, poetry, and rebellion. One unknown woman wrote, "We are flowers in a garden whose walls are too high, but even walls cannot stop fragrance." Not every legend of the harem is tragic. Some speak of unexpected kindness, of sisterhood among the women who shared the same captivity. During times of plague or famine, harem women organized charitable works, sending food and medicine to the poor of Istanbul. Others used their influence to sponsor mosques, schools, and fountains, leaving marks of their presence across the empire. Behind the veil of secrecy, they shaped Ottoman society in ways few could imagine. Still, the outside world remained obsessed with the idea of the harem as a paradise of pleasure. Painters in Paris and London imagined it as a land of eternal youth and sensuality, their canvases full of reclining figures and silken drapery. But those who had actually lived within its walls would have laughed at those fantasies. The harem was not paradise. It was a battlefield dressed in velvet. And yet, even amid intrigue and control, love sometimes bloomed. There are rare stories, half fact, half myth, of genuine affection between the sultan and his favorites. One sultan was said to visit a particular concubine every night just to hear her sing. Another had a slave who, rather than compete for his favor, begged to be set free. He granted her wish and never forgot her name. Such stories became legends in themselves, proof that even within the strictest order, the human heart could rebel. Beyond the Golden Gates, the empire's fate continued to turn on what happened within those chambers. As we move deeper into the story, we'll see how the harem became not just a private world, but a political institution that could change history itself, and how the women who lived there learned to transform their captivity into influence. They called it the Sultanate of Women, a time when veiled figures ruled the empire not from the throne room, but from the hidden chambers of the harem. Between the mid-1500s and the late 1600s, the Ottoman world entered a strange, intoxicating era when mothers, wives, and concubines shaped imperial policy as decisively as any vizier or general. Their names were murmured in the corridors of power, feared by men who had once dismissed them as ornaments. What began with Hürrem Sultan's rise now reached its zenith. The women of the harem had become the empire's most subtle architects. When Suleiman the Magnificent died in 1566, the empire trembled. His son Selim II, called Selim the Sot, was said to prefer the pleasures of the palace to the burdens of rule. In his stead, it was his mother, the formidable Hürrem, and later his consort, Nurbanu Sultan, who guided affairs of state. Nurbanu, a Venetian by birth and once a slave, proved a master of diplomacy. It was whispered that she exchanged secret letters with the Doge of Venice, balancing the empire's might with her own shadow correspondence. Some claimed she kept a small chest filled with foreign jewels, each one a gift from European kings sent in gratitude for her silent intervention. Whether true or not, the legend cemented her reputation as the first true matriarch of Ottoman politics. After Nurbanu came Safiye Sultan, beautiful, proud, and ruthlessly intelligent. Her power grew so great that foreign ambassadors bowed as deeply to her as they did to the Sultan himself. Stories tell of her receiving petitions in hidden chambers scented with amber, the walls lined with mirrors that reflected her image 100 times, as if to multiply her influence. Her rivals accused her of witchcraft. Her allies called her the empire's guardian. Even the English Queen Elizabeth I sent her letters. Gifts of embroidered gowns and jeweled fans crossed the seas, tokens of respect between two women who ruled their worlds from behind very different veils. But power in the harem was never permanent. It shimmered and shifted as fragile as perfume. The same corridors that echoed with triumph could, in a heartbeat, fall silent with disgrace. Each new sultan brought new favorites, new alliances, new dangers. The Valide Sultan of one reign could become the forgotten exile of the next. For the women who survived, cunning was the only armor. In the reign of Sultan Mehmed III, the harem reached its most dangerous balance between passion and paranoia. Mehmed's mother, Safiye, controlled the court with an iron hand. Yet even she could not stop the ancient custom that required a new sultan to eliminate his brothers, a practice meant to prevent civil war but which filled the harem with unspeakable sorrow. Chroniclers wrote that the cries of mothers echoed through the palace on the night Mehmed ascended the throne, as the young princes met their fate. Whether true or not, the story haunted Istanbul for generations, a grim reminder that the harem's beauty was never free of tragedy. And then came Hürrem Sultan, perhaps the most powerful woman in Ottoman history. Born Anastasia in a small Greek island village, she entered the harem as a slave and rose to become the consort of Sultan Ahmed III. Her intelligence was unmatched, her patience legendary. When Ahmed died young, Hürrem's influence did not fade. It grew. She became Valide Sultan to two of her sons and even ruled as regent for her grandson. For nearly half a century, Hürrem steered the empire through crises, wars, and palace coups. Ministers trembled before her. Foreign diplomats sought her favor. Poets praised her beauty and cunning in equal measure. Yet even Hürrem's reign was shadowed by betrayal. Rumors spread that she used astrologers to predict her enemies' deaths, that she hid secret passages connecting her quarters to the sultan's rooms, that she once smuggled a letter of execution past the eunuchs by rolling it inside a pastry. Her enemies waited decades for revenge, and when it came, it was as silent and merciless as the empire itself. In 1651, her own daughter-in-law, Hürrem Sultan, ordered her strangled in her bedchamber. The official story called it a tragedy of misunderstanding. The people whispered that Hürrem had waited for years, pretending submission until the night she struck. When dawn came, Hürrem was dead, and Hürrem ruled in her place. The legend of Hürrem's ghost soon followed. Palace servants swore they heard her footsteps echo through the harem corridors, her silken slippers gliding over marble floors. Some claimed she appeared in mirrors, veiled in blue light, whenever the empire faced crisis. Whether phantom or memory, her presence lingered long after her body was gone. Under Hürrem Sultan, the empire saw both decline and renewal. She oversaw the completion of the magnificent Yeni Mosque in Istanbul, a project begun decades earlier but long delayed by politics and superstition. To many, the mosque became a symbol of feminine strength, proof that even in an empire ruled by men, a woman's vision could shape the skyline itself. Beyond the palace walls, the public watched these women with fascination and fear. They were mothers and rulers, queens and prisoners. Ballads were sung about them in the streets, often mixing admiration with scandal. Merchants in the bazaars told tales of the Valid's secret meetings with viziers. Sailors on the Bosphorus whispered that the lights in the Harem's upper windows were signals to foreign agents. Truth and myth blended until no one could tell them apart. What made the Sultanate of Women so remarkable was not only the power these women held, but the subtlety with which they wielded it. Their weapons were silence, charm, and the ability to read the currents of male ambition. They could turn a compliment into a command, a smile into a decree. A single misplaced word could mean exile. A single gesture could elevate a family for generations. Even the eunuchs, who served as the harem sentinels, were drawn into the web. Some became trusted allies, others manipulators in their own right. The Kızlar Asa often acted as an intermediary between the Valide Sultan and the Grand Vizier, effectively linking the harem to the empire's administration. In this way, the supposed women's quarters became the true heart of Ottoman power, its pulse hidden behind carved wooden screens and veiled faces. But as the 17th century wore on, the empire itself began to strain under the weight of its own grandeur. The walls of the harem, once symbols of order, now echoed with uncertainty. The women who had once commanded ministers now faced a new kind of peril: irrelevance. The tide of history was changing, and with it, the delicate balance between secrecy and control. Still, the stories of those centuries remained, stories of love, ambition, betrayal, and survival. The Sultanate of Women had shown the world that even in the most restrictive of confines, power could find its own form, and influence could flow through the narrowest of corridors. And yet, beyond the politics and the intrigue, one question lingered. What did it truly feel like to live inside that golden cage? What dreams were born there? What heartbreaks never spoken? As we move deeper into the story, we step not into the chambers of queens, but into the private hearts of the women themselves. The concubines, the attendants, the forgotten voices who lived, loved, and dreamed within the harem's hidden world. Inside the harem, the rhythms of life were as intricate as the mosaics that lined its walls. From dawn to nightfall, every hour was shaped by ritual, training, and an unspoken awareness that each woman's future could change with a single command. The palace itself was a city within a city, courtyards layered one behind another, gates guarded by eunuchs who knew the name and rank of every soul inside. No man entered without cause, no woman left without permission, yet within those bounds 1,000 lives unfolded, intersecting, colliding, and fading like patterns in a woven carpet. The youngest girls arrived frightened and silent, their faces hidden beneath travel veils. They were brought first to the Asemi Odalara, the rooms of novices where they began the slow transformation from captives to court women. Here, older attendants taught them the art of posture and movement, how to walk with grace, how to lower their eyes just enough to appear modest but never weak. They learned music and dance, embroidery fine enough to rival painters, and the subtle etiquette that governed every gesture in the Sultan's palace. Even laughter had rules. A sound too loud could mark one as common. Each girl was given a new name, often one that meant a flower or a jewel, as if her past could be erased with a word. A Circassian shepherd's daughter might become Lal, the tulip. A captured Greek might be renamed Melek, the angel. The renaming was both an end and a beginning, a signal that their old lives had vanished behind the harem's gates. To survive here, they had to reinvent themselves. Among them moved the Kalfa, senior women who served as tutors and disciplinarians. They were strict, yet some took pity on the terrified newcomers, offering quiet advice about the ways of the palace. "Do not stare," they would whisper. "Do not speak unless spoken to. Never forget who listens behind every wall." Because within the harem, walls had ears. The women's days were filled with lessons and tasks. Mornings began with prayer and then hours of sewing, music, or recitation. Those who showed talent in the arts might be chosen to perform for the Valide Sultan or to accompany court ceremonies. Others were trained in conversation and courtly manners, preparing for the day they might be presented to the Sultan himself. But for most, that day never came. The harem's hierarchy was vast, and only a few ever reached the upper tiers where the sultan's favorites lived. Despite its discipline, the harem was not devoid of joy. The women found ways to carve beauty out of captivity. They tended small gardens on the terraces, growing jasmine and mint. They composed songs about the sea they could no longer see. During the long summer nights when the marble floors still held the heat of the day, they gathered in secret to tell stories, tales of love and adventure, sometimes about the world they had lost, sometimes about the dreams they still nurtured. The eunuchs pretended not to hear, though even they sometimes paused to listen. There were festivals, too. During Bayram, sweets and gifts were distributed throughout the palace, and the harem filled with laughter and silk rustling. On those days, the sultan might send a tray of jewels to a favored concubine or a bolt of brocade to a tutor. It was said that each gift carried a hidden message, a color, a scent, a pattern, that only the recipient would understand. Red silk meant favor, blue meant patience, white, farewell. Still, beneath the music and celebration, rivalry simmered. A careless word could spark months of whispered slander. Friendships were dangerous. Loyalty could shift overnight. Women formed small alliances, bound by necessity more than affection. They exchanged secrets, offered favors, and sometimes betrayed each other to gain the slightest advantage. It was a place where a glance could be a weapon and silence a shield. Rumors flourished like vines. One favorite was said to sleep with a charm sewn into her pillow to keep envy away. Another was rumored to have learned a forgotten dance that could sway a sultan's heart. Servants told stories of enchanted perfumes distilled from rare ambergris and night-blooming flowers, said to ensure a dream of love. Whether any of these tales were true, no one knew, but belief gave them power. In a world so controlled, myth became a kind of freedom. Even the architecture seemed alive with secrets. There were hidden staircases that curved behind the walls, so narrow that only one person could pass at a time. There were listening windows, small latticed openings where eunuchs stood guard, unseen but ever present. Some claimed there was an underground passage leading directly to the Bosphorus, built centuries earlier in case the palace was besieged. Others insisted that the Valide Sultan had a private room filled with stars painted on the ceiling, where she consulted astrologers about the empire's fate. Beyond the physical walls, imagination did the rest. To outsiders, the harem was a realm of mystery. To those within, it was both sanctuary and snare. The women lived in the shadow of the sultan, yet most would never meet him. Only a handful rose to the level of Haseki, the favored consort. For the rest, their lives unfolded in quiet cycles: service, learning, prayer, and the faint, persistent hope that destiny might one day notice them. And yet, in that confinement, something extraordinary happened. Many of these women became remarkably educated. They learned languages, wrote poetry, memorized histories. Some corresponded secretly with scholars through eunuchs who carried their messages beyond the gates. In later centuries, historians would find letters written in delicate calligraphy, signed only with symbols: a rose, a crescent, a single teardrop. Their words spoke not of captivity, but of perception, art, and faith. The harem's daily life thus contained a paradox: strict control and quiet creation, jealousy and sisterhood, beauty and fear intertwined. Those who managed to survive long enough often emerged wise, poised, and unreadable. They learned to conceal emotion behind composure, to speak in gestures instead of words. In that sense, the harem was not merely a school for servitude, but a school for power, a place that taught patience, strategy, and endurance more effectively than any battlefield. Occasionally, visitors to the outer palace caught fleeting glimpses of the harem's life: a procession of veiled figures moving through the courtyard, or the faint strains of music drifting from the upper windows at dusk. They would carry those impressions back to Europe, embellish them, and transform them into fantasies. The reality was quieter but far more complex. Within the silence of those marble halls, women dreamed. Some dreamed of escape, some of influence, some of love. But all knew that their lives were bound to the turning of the empire's fate. If a sultan's mood changed, if politics shifted, even the most favored could fall. That knowledge sharpened their instincts, making them observers of every nuance. The raised eyebrow of a eunuch, the delayed message from the valid, the new perfume carried by a rival. And so the harem endured, generation after generation, a microcosm of the empire itself. Disciplined, opulent, fragile, and full of unseen depths. Each woman added her thread to its tapestry, then vanished, leaving behind only stories. Some would be remembered, most would not. But all were part of the same great silence, the silence that still seems to echo through the ruins of Topkapi today, where tourists walk the marble floors and wonder what lives once unfolded there. While the harem existed behind stone walls, its influence reached far beyond them. Ministers, generals, and even foreign ambassadors learned that a whisper from the Sultan's private chambers could change the course of an empire. Power in the Ottoman world was not merely declared in the divan. It was also born in the stillness of candle-lit rooms, in the subtle negotiations that took place behind silk curtains. Through the Sultan's mother and his favored consort, messages moved unseen. The Valid Sultan often received envoys privately, not as official diplomats, but as guests. They entered through hidden courtyards, led by eunuchs who ensured their visits would never appear in any record. There, amid perfumed air and soft lamplight, the empire's secrets traded hands. Many European ambassadors confessed, sometimes in coded letters to their kings, that without the favor of the Valid Sultan, no alliance could endure. One Venetian envoy wrote that he had sent the Valid a mirror framed in silver and pearls, so that she may see herself as clearly as she sees through the souls of men. Another described sending a rare falcon to a harem attendant, knowing it would eventually find its way to the Sultan's favorite. Such gestures were not gifts, but messages, reminders that diplomacy flowed as easily through the palace corridors as through battlefields. The women of the harem understood this perfectly. They became experts in subtle power, using influence rather than command. Their recommendations for appointments, marriages, and even military decisions were couched in gentle phrases, never direct. Yet the effect was the same. When a Valid Sultan suggested that a particular governor might be more comfortable in another province, he was soon reassigned. When she spoke of a minister who brings worry to the Sultan's rest, that minister's days were numbered. This hidden diplomacy fascinated and alarmed Europe. To Christian courts, the idea that a Muslim empire was, in part, guided by women seemed at once exotic and threatening. Pamphlets and reports began to circulate, some factual, most pure fantasy, describing the Ottoman harem as a place where beauty ruled and men were slaves to passion. Painters in Venice and Paris filled their canvases with imagined scenes, women reclining beside fountains, musicians playing before a languid ruler, servants carrying trays of fruit and gold. It was the Orient of dreams, built not from truth, but from yearning. Yet there was something in these fantasies that mirrored a genuine mystery. The Ottomans themselves guarded the harem's secrets fiercely. Even the empire's own chroniclers spoke of it only in guarded terms, calling it the inner palace, the private garden, or the sacred household. They understood that within those walls politics and piety intertwined, and that too much knowledge could be dangerous. The eunuchs who served as the harem's guardians played a central role in this hidden world. The chief black eunuch, or Kuzlar Asa, not only supervised the harem but also controlled the empire's charitable foundations, an enormous source of wealth and influence. Some of them became kingmakers in their own right, acting as intermediaries between the sultan's women and the viziers. Because they could move between the inner palace and the outer court, they carried secrets that no other official could reach. Rumors of their influence spread quickly. One chronicler claimed that a eunuch once replaced an entire cabinet of viziers overnight after overhearing a single insult to the Valid Sultan. Another tale told of a eunuch who smuggled a letter from a European queen directly to the harem, and returned with an answer sealed in the Sultan's own hand. Whether these stories were true or not, they reveal how the harem had become the beating heart of Ottoman politics, hidden, protected, and yet inescapably powerful. Even merchants felt its pull. The demand for silks, jewels, and perfumes to supply the harem's luxuries created entire industries. From Damascus came glass lamps and embroidered robes. From Persia, carpets and fine textiles. From Venice, mirrors and silver. Each item that entered the harem passed through careful inspection, recorded in ledgers that now rest in the archives. Faint echoes of a world where beauty and power were measured in trade routes and tribute. But perhaps the most potent export of the harem was its myth. Across Europe, the idea of the Eastern harem became an obsession. Travelers claimed to have seen what none ever had: secret chambers filled with pleasure, fountains that ran with wine, women who never aged. A few of these travelers were real. Most were storytellers selling fantasy to a fascinated audience. The truth, that the harem was a disciplined and deeply hierarchical institution, was too complex for their tales. And so myth overtook history, until even scholars blurred the line between the two. Ironically, the Ottomans encouraged this mystique. Secrecy was a kind of power. The empire's rulers understood that what could not be seen could not easily be challenged. By allowing foreigners to imagine the harem as a paradise of pleasure, they hid the far more formidable truth that it was, in fact, a fortress of political intelligence. Still, within its walls, human stories unfolded: love, ambition, betrayal, longing. Some women fell in love with men they would never touch, eunuchs who became their confidants. Some mourned children lost to the politics of succession. Others found quiet satisfaction in the beauty of the world they had helped create: the gardens, the fountains, the calligraphy they sponsored. Their influence seeped into art, architecture, and the empire's very language. By the 18th century, the balance began to shift. The power of the Valid Sultan waned as the empire struggled with reform and external pressures. European influence grew, and the mystique of the harem transformed from awe to curiosity, from fear to fascination. Western visitors began to record not the legends but the architecture itself: the tiled walls, the carved wood, the echoing corridors that seemed to remember every whisper. And yet, even as the Ottoman world modernized, the harem's shadow endured. It had become more than a place. It was now a symbol of secrecy, of beauty, of the unspoken forces that shape nations. It stood as a reminder that empires are not built by rulers alone, but also by those whose names history nearly forgot. Today, when you walk through the remains of the Topkapi Palace, it is hard to imagine the lives that once filled those spaces. The marble floors gleam under the light, and the rooms stand empty. But if you listen closely, you might still hear faint echoes: the rustle of silk, the ring of distant laughter, the soft, measured footsteps of those who once held empires in their hands. Because the true story of the harem was never about desire alone. It was about power hidden behind beauty, politics woven through intimacy, and the quiet strength of those who learned to rule without ever leaving their gilded cage. Even after the Sultan's reigns passed into memory, the harem remained a place of whispers, not just of ambition or intrigue, but of something more mysterious, more spectral. Visitors to Topkapi in later centuries often reported a chill in certain corridors, a faint echo of voices that could not be explained. As if the palace itself remembered the lives it had held, legends grew like ivy along the marble walls: stories of cursed jewels, vanishing concubines, and prophetic dreams that foretold the empire's fate. One of the most persistent tales involved a jewel known as the Sultan's tear, a large sapphire said to have belonged to a favored concubine of Sultan Ahmed I. According to rumor, any woman who touched it without permission would be cursed with misfortune, an idea that terrified even the bravest attendants. Some whispered that the jewel had caused illness in more than one woman, though historians could never verify these claims. Ghost stories also proliferated. Some said that the spirit of Hürrem Sultan, strangled in her own chambers, wandered the harem at night, her silken slippers gliding soundlessly over the marble. Servants claimed to hear her weeping or sighing near the windows, especially when the empire faced instability. Others swore that a pale figure, veiled in shadow, appeared near the Valide Sultan's former apartments, gesturing as if giving orders. Whether these were tricks of the light or echoes of memory, the tales became part of the harem's identity, blurring history with myth. Dreams were another source of fascination. It was said that some concubines could interpret the sultan's dreams, translating omens into advice for the court. One story tells of a young woman who predicted the outcome of a naval battle simply by reading the sultan's sleep. The tale spread quickly, embellishing her reputation as a kind of seer, though no evidence confirms that her interpretations ever influenced decisions. Such stories reinforced the belief that the harem was not only a political engine, but also a space touched by the mystical, a place where human desire and supernatural perception collided. Some legends focused on punishment and secrecy. There were tales of rooms that had been sealed for decades, said to contain women who had angered the sultan or fallen out of favor. Their names vanished from records. Their voices, it was whispered, could still be heard at night, crying for recognition. Courtiers claimed that if one approached certain doors after midnight, one might glimpse a shadow or hear the rustle of silk. Visitors to the palace centuries later described a sensation of being watched, of invisible eyes following their steps through deserted halls. Other myths involved the harem's gardens. Certain fountains, it was said, were cursed, their waters reflecting not the face of the drinker, but their deepest fears. Legends told of women who looked into the fountains and saw rival concubines plotting their demise, or visions of their own children, uncertain of their future. These stories were often repeated in hushed voices, meant to warn young novices of the invisible stakes that governed their lives. Whether magical or metaphorical, they reinforced the harem's reputation as a place where every glance, every reflection could carry danger. Even outsiders contributed to the mythology. European travelers, eager to entertain their audiences, amplified tales of the harem's secrets. They claimed to have seen phantom corridors, secret tunnels to the Bosphorus, or rooms where mirrors multiplied the sultan's image 100 times, allowing him to observe his favorites without ever being seen. Some even suggested that eunuchs and concubines conspired in whispered councils, shaping politics through coded glances and gestures. Though these accounts were often exaggerations, they cemented the image of the harem as both beautiful and perilous, a place where reality and imagination intertwined. The women themselves, however, were aware of these legends and used them strategically. Some played on the fear of spirits or curses to maintain influence over rivals or servants. A senior concubine might let it be known that a particular room was haunted, discouraging younger women from entering. Stories of the sultan's favorites possessing strange powers or divine insight could bolster their standing. The harem's myths were not only tales for outsiders, they were tools woven into the politics of daily life. Even the architecture seemed to support the ghost stories. Narrow staircases twisted in unexpected ways, latticework cast complex shadows on the walls, and courtyards created echoes that carried voices far longer than normal. A single candle flickering in a corner could transform a mundane hallway into a scene of enchantment or dread. Over time, these details blurred into legend, making it impossible for visitors, or even palace residents, to separate fact from imagination. Some stories focused on lost love or tragedy. A concubine who had been sent away for displeasing the sultan was said to haunt her former apartments, waiting for a return that would never come. A young princess, rumored to have died of heartbreak after being separated from her family, was said to appear at twilight near the fountains, her reflection shimmering on the water. Real grief and real longing. And yet, amid the shadows and ghost stories, life in the harem persisted. Women continued to learn, to create art, to influence the empire's politics. They danced, composed music, embroidered, and wrote letters that might never be read. The myths, rather than diminishing their power, often enhanced it, making the harem a space where imagination became as potent as authority, and where the boundaries between the living and the legendary blurred. By the 18th and 19th centuries, when the Ottoman Empire faced internal decline and increasing European influence, the harem's reputation as a mysterious and forbidden world had solidified. Visitors came not only to admire its architecture, but also to hear its tales, whispered stories of ghosts, curses, and prophetic dreams. The myths persisted because they were true, in a sense. The harem remained a place where power was invisible, where influence was subtle, and where the stories told about it could shape perception as decisively as any decree. Even today, those corridors seem to breathe with memory. Tourists walking the halls of Topkapi sometimes claim to feel sudden chills, or to hear faint laughter echoing from nowhere. The marble floors gleam under sunlight, yet the palace seems alive with traces of its past. And though centuries have passed, the legends of the harem endure, a testament to a world where women wielded power in silence, where myths were tools as sharp as any sword, and where the invisible threads of influence extended far beyond the palace gates. In the next chapter, we will explore the harem's final centuries, a time when its political influence waned, but its cultural and social power persisted, and when the last echoes of its secrets and legends continued to shape the Ottoman imagination. By the late 18th century, the Ottoman harem was changing. The empire itself faced mounting pressures from Europe. Military defeats, territorial losses, and political reform threatened the centuries-old balance of power. Within the palace, the harem's role as a political force gradually diminished, but its social and cultural influence endured. The corridors that once echoed with whispered decrees now resonated with new concerns: etiquette, tradition, and the preservation of a fading way of life. The Valid Sultan no longer commanded ministers with the same authority as Kösem or Turhan. Sultans began to assert themselves more directly, influenced by Western models of governance and courtly reform. Still, the women of the harem adapted. They became patrons of art, architecture, and literature, using culture rather than politics to maintain their presence. Palaces were adorned with gardens, fountains, and calligraphy that reflected their tastes and aspirations. Musicians, poets, and painters flourished under their sponsorship, leaving behind a legacy that would outlive the empire itself. Even as direct political power waned, the harem remained a world apart. Its rituals continued, carefully observed and maintained. The women still practiced music, embroidery, and poetry, and the younger girls underwent the rigorous training of previous generations. The hierarchy endured, though it was less tied to the sultan's favor and more to familial connections or seniority. The eunuchs remained custodians of the inner world, ensuring that the boundaries between the palace's private and public spaces remained secure. Yet, the myths that had once surrounded the harem began to evolve. Travelers and writers, increasingly influenced by Orientalist imagination, emphasized mystery and eroticism, ignoring the institution's political sophistication. Paintings, novels, and plays depicted veiled women reclining in lavish rooms, attended by attentive eunuchs, while foreign visitors concocted ever more elaborate tales of secret pleasures and forbidden rituals. Some of these stories were based on kernels of truth, the secrecy, the hierarchy, the influence, but they were embellished into legends that captivated Europe. Meanwhile, within the palace, women continued to exert subtle influence, arranging marriages for nieces and cousins, controlling access to the sultan, and managing the harem's finances allowed them to shape social networks and economic outcomes. Even as Europe encroached upon Ottoman trade, the harem's demand for luxury goods sustained craftsmen and merchants. Silks from Persia, jewelry from Venice, and perfume from Arabia passed through the harem's gates, ensuring that its presence remained felt in Istanbul and beyond. The harem's decline was gradual, punctuated by episodes of both scandal and adaptation. In some cases, women attempted to retain influence by intervening in palace politics, only to be blocked by reforming sultans or by shifting military priorities. In others, they channeled their energies into charitable works, founding schools, mosques, and hospitals, thereby leaving a lasting imprint on Ottoman society. Even in exile, former favorites of the sultan or displaced Valid sultans were treated with deference, their names carrying weight in both social and religious circles. One fascinating feature of this period was the persistence of superstition and legend. Tales of haunted rooms, prophetic dreams, and cursed objects continued to circulate within the palace, even as the harem's political clout waned. Some women encouraged these stories, using them as tools to protect their own positions or to intimidate rivals. The myths became intertwined with daily life, A shadow in a corridor could be explained as a ghost, a sudden illness as the effect of a cursed jewel. These stories reinforced the aura of the harem, preserving its mystique even as the empire modernized. Cultural exchange also grew in importance. European diplomats and merchants who visited Istanbul brought knowledge, ideas, and artifacts into the palace. Women of the harem adapted, learning foreign languages and commissioning European-style paintings and furniture. This blending of traditions created a unique Ottoman aesthetic, a fusion of East and West, of secrecy and display. In many ways, the harem became a center of cosmopolitan culture, influencing taste and fashion throughout the empire. By the 19th century, the harem had become a more domestic institution. The focus shifted from political intrigue to family management, education, and cultural preservation. Sultans increasingly adopted Western military and administrative practices, reducing the need for the harem to serve as a hidden power center. Yet, the legends, stories, and symbols of authority remained intact. Visitors continued to be fascinated, guided tours often emphasizing the mystery, beauty, and whispered scandals of centuries past. Despite the harem's decline, its influence on society endured in subtler ways. Women trained within its walls carried its lessons outward, managing households, influencing marriage alliances, and shaping the upbringing of children who might themselves rise to prominence. The artistic and cultural patronage initiated by powerful harem women left lasting monuments, mosques, fountains, and works of art that still survive today, silent witnesses to the lives that once unfolded behind heavy doors. Perhaps most compelling is the harem's enduring symbolic power. Even as the Ottoman Empire waned, the notion of the harem captured imaginations across continents. Writers, painters, and historians depicted it as a place of intrigue, beauty, and hidden strength. Its lessons about the intersection of power and subtle influence continue to fascinate modern audiences, reminding us that authority is not always wielded through overt force. Sometimes it operates in whispers, gestures, and hidden networks. In this sense, the harem's story is both an ending and a beginning. The last echoes of political power faded, but the cultural and social legacy endured. The myths, legends, and stories, some grounded in reality, others in imagination, shaped perceptions of the Ottoman world, both at home and abroad. The harem remained a symbol of secret authority, a reminder that history is often influenced by forces unseen, operating in rooms where the walls remember every step, every whisper, every gesture of ambition and desire. As we prepare to enter the final chapter, we will explore the harem's ultimate legacy, the ways it shaped perceptions of gender, power, and secrecy in both the Ottoman Empire and the wider world, and the lessons its hidden corridors still hold for those who seek to understand the intertwining of influence, myth, and history. As the Ottoman Empire entered its final centuries, the harem's walls seemed quieter, yet they remained alive with memory. The political storms of the Sultanate of Women had passed, and the last Valid sultans no longer commanded ministers or dictated appointments. Yet within the palace the rhythms of harem life continued, a mixture of ritual, culture, and quiet observation. The corridors, once crowded with intrigue and ambition, now held a subtler influence, a legacy of strategy, intelligence, and survival that echoed far beyond the palace gates. Even as the empire contracted under internal strife and external pressures, the harem left its mark. Women who had learned the art of influence behind veils and screens applied it elsewhere, in charitable works, in courtly networks, and in the education of the next generation. The architectural and artistic patronage of the harem endured as monuments to their power. Fountains that still trickle in Istanbul, courtyards, mosques that reflect the elegance of their sponsors, and manuscripts decorated with calligraphy that survived centuries. Every stone, every tile, and every carved wooden lattice carries whispers of lives once lived with extraordinary attention to detail, strategy, and presence. The legends, too, persisted. Tales of the Sultan's tear, cursed jewels, and ghostly apparitions continued to circulate, delighting storytellers and mystifying visitors. The harem's reputation as a mysterious, almost otherworldly place became as enduring as its physical presence. Europeans painted it in romanticized colors. Poets and novelists imagined intrigues more scandalous than reality. And yet, for those who lived there, it was never about fantasy. It was about survival, ambition, artistry, and the careful calibration of influence. The myths reflected a truth of the human condition, that secrecy itself can be power, and that those who master subtlety often wield the greatest force. Even historians today find themselves fascinated. Scholars studying Ottoman archives uncover fragments of correspondence, poetry, and household records that reveal the intelligence, creativity, and agency of harem women. Letters in delicate calligraphy, carefully folded and hidden, reveal mentorship, guidance, and strategy. They show women who negotiated complex hierarchies, who managed vast estates, and who influenced not only palace life, but the broader currents of the empire. The harem was not merely a footnote to history. It was a hub of cultural and political significance, shrouded in secrecy and legend. And so the harem's story serves as a bridge between myth and reality, between the private and the political, between history and imagination. It reminds us that power does not always take the form of open authority. Often it resides behind screens in whispered words and in the delicate dance of influence. The women of the Ottoman harem mastered that dance with a skill and sophistication that historians are only now beginning to fully appreciate. Their legacy is visible not only in the monuments and art they commissioned, but also in the stories we continue to tell, tales of mystery. Whispers of forbidden corridors and legends of phantom footsteps persist because they capture something essential: the blending of human ambition with human imagination. The harem was a stage where the rules of power were rewritten every day, where ambition and patience were as important as beauty or intelligence, and where the smallest gesture could alter the course of an empire. And yet, perhaps the most remarkable lesson of all is one that transcends centuries. The harem teaches us about resilience. Women who entered as slaves or captives learned to navigate the most complex social, cultural, and political networks imaginable. They transformed confinement into influence, invisibility into authority, and whispers into history. Even when the political power of the harem waned, its cultural and symbolic imprint remained, proving that history remembers not only the loudest voices, but also those that spoke most carefully, most cleverly, and most strategically. As we walk through the quiet halls of Topkapi today, it is impossible not to sense those echoes. The marble floors still gleam, the gardens still bloom, and the latticed windows still filter light into the rooms where so many lives were once lived in secrecy and strategy. Visitors may never see the sultan, the valide, or the favored concubine, but they can feel the pulse of a world that shaped empires quietly, subtly, and indelibly. So as we close this journey through the secret sexual politics of the Ottoman harem, consider this. History is often hidden behind walls, veils, and myths. The most powerful forces are not always visible, and the most extraordinary stories are sometimes whispered rather than shouted. What fascinated you most? Was it the ruthless rise of Hürrem Sultan, the cunning and cruelty of Kösem, the ghostly legends that lingered long after the empire's power faded? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Which fact or legend surprised you most? And if you want to continue exploring the hidden histories of sex power and desire across time, subscribe and join us for more stories where mystery meets history and the walls of the past reveal the truths of human ambition and longing. Because in the end, the Ottoman harem was never just a place. It was a world. Beautiful, dangerous, secretive, and unforgettable. And its echoes still teach us that history is not only made by those who sit on thrones, but also by those who learn to wield power in silence, behind veils, behind doors, and behind the stories that survive centuries.